Some slight nudity in a portrait painting here, but we'll see if I can get away with it. And there's one where I've actually censored it because it's actual fine arts, but there's nudity in fine arts. But first off, let's talk about why we talk about conflict. And there is a book by Donald Kagan, who is a historian, called On the Origins of War and the Preservation of Peace. And he argues that really a lot of the way that we are taught about war and conflict is wrong. Because if you go back and look at the last 2,000 years of European history, you would be hard-pressed to find a year here and there where there wasn't some kind of war. And he says that's because when nations pursuing their own interests come into conflict with each other, the natural result of that is war. Which is unfortunate, and it's this crisis that keeps happening. In the same way, we now think of disease as this one-off thing, that's this massive crisis that we just couldn't quite stop, which you might be thinking about right now, and people castigate politicians for saying, why couldn't you stop this disease from killing people? But 100 years ago, and all the time before then, this disease was just a thing that happened that swept through and killed millions of people. And it was this constant, unending, naturalistic phenomenon. In the same way now, when there is a war, we view it as this crisis that should have been averted. But Donald Kagan argues that really, when there's a peace, you have to ask, why was there a peace? Rather than asking, when there's a war, why was there a war? And we're going to do that. But it's not just a thing that's continued to happen for centuries. That's not reason enough alone to talk about wars all the time. Because, well, that doesn't make them interesting. That doesn't make them good. But what conflict really is a really good proxy, a really good case study for understanding the different trends and forces in play at the time the conflict happens. That's really why I think that studying and analysing wars are interesting. Also, they're often a good story, but really, when we look at the trends and forces in conflict that led to this war and were in place throughout it, in a very Hegelian dialectic, I'm not going to describe that anymore, that's the only words you're going to get from that side of things. But when you understand these conflicts, you can really understand the society and the people living in these societies that caused the war and that let it happen for so long in the first place. And finally, I do think that we can still maintain our focus, and our focus here is the goal of this lecture series is really to say the history of people, the history of humanity is the history of people. So let's look at people, right? That's what I've tried to do at every stage. And I think you very much can do that. And you can keep the focus rather than, this king declared war on this nation and then No, we're going to look at the actual lives of people and how things happened on the ground level. And I think we can keep our focus even when talking about conflicts.